Recording in progress.
Hello, my name is Grace Roncke. Today's date is April 5th, 2023. The time is 2:46. We are Pewaukee VFW, and I am interviewing Colin Dewey, who was born on May 22nd, 1990 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and served in Hawaii and Afghanistan between the years of 2009 and 2019. Colin Dewey was an E6 in the branch of the Navy and served as an intelligence analyst. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So the first question I have for you is, what motivated you to join the military and the specific branch you joined?
Yeah, so for me, I was born and raised in Michigan. Loved Michigan, loved the Midwest, but for me it was a great opportunity. One, to pay for college, that was definitely a big part of it. And the other big one was just to be able to travel. I wanted to see the world a little bit. Up until that point, I hadn't been out of the country, hadn't traveled too much besides family trips, so wanted to see the world. And then also the Navy, I should say the military in general, seemed like an exciting career path to go down. There was just so many opportunities at the time. When I first started looking in the military, it started with just talking to a recruiter during lunchtime at high school. And one thing led to another. I visited every branch's office in Grand Rapids, met with all of them for a while. I thought I was definitely gonna be a Marine, and then the more I learned about the Navy, I just felt like there was more opportunities that interested me there. And originally I thought I wanted to go into Special Forces, so that's originally what I signed up for. I ended up getting into a totally different career path, but the Navy just seemed to check all those boxes for me: travel, education, and just the ability to meet new people and get around and see things. That was really exciting for me.
Yeah. Once deciding to go into the Navy, what was basic training like for that?
Basic training was a huge wake-up call. So like I said, when you're living at home your entire life, I think you get used to your parents helping you out with a lot, and then suddenly being thrown into a scenario where you're doing your own laundry, you're making your own bed, you're making all your own decisions. I still remember the first night I got to boot camp. I was laying in bed and I just thought, what am I doing here? It might have been a few tears shed that night. I can't confirm or deny that, but I felt like I grew up overnight. I felt like during boot camp I went from 18 to 24, 25 in a matter of 9 weeks. And you know, that's the whole part of boot camp too, is you learn what the military is all about, that camaraderie. I mean, you go from people you see every day to sharing a bunk with someone from Alabama and being 2 bunks down from someone in Tennessee, Maine. So getting to meet people from around the country was really exciting. And you know, at the end of the day, we're all in the same situation. We're all between 18 to 22, all just learning how to be not just sailors, but you know, essentially adults at the same time too.
So after boot camp, what kind of training did you receive after the basic training?
Yeah, so for me, like I said, originally I thought I was definitely going to be a Navy SEAL, and it turned out I wasn't very good with treading water, holding bricks, and other items. But luckily for me, I was able to branch into a career as an intelligence analyst. So for that, we were in Pensacola for training. You're there for multiple months, learning how to be, Navy calls it cryptologic technician, CTR. Essentially my job would just be as an intelligence analyst. So I was down there learning how to read signals, learning about RF frequencies, all the different parts of that job. And the funny thing is, I ended up doing that job, but over the course of my military career, I ended up taking on way more roles than I ever thought I would. So before my deployment to Afghanistan, I had to train for a completely different job as a signals intelligence analyst to support Army units. And then my last duty station with the Marines, I had to learn how to essentially teach Marines how to use equipment to block IEDs, signals from IEDs, and that was a whole different set of training. So the Navy is very much, military in general, everyone has their A school where they go to learn their job, but during your whole career, you're always learning new stuff on the job, always going to new schools. So it's one of those things similar to your career when you get out, you never stop learning.
Yeah. So what was your first like assignment like? So where were you, and then what kind of like assignment were you assigned for?
So when I left A school in Pensacola, I actually got really lucky. I was supposed to be going to a destroyer in Norfolk. So that was going to be, I was going to go from Pensacola to essentially living on a ship for the next few years. Not that I don't think it would have been bad, but at the last minute, they essentially said everyone from our class and all the classes around us would be going to Hawaii to be stationed with the NSA, which I certainly did not argue against. So I went from A school in Pensacola to Hawaii, supporting Pacific Fleet operations around Asia, Hawaiian Islands, essentially helping monitor our fleet, helping decision makers know what's going on in the Pacific. And while I was there, I took on a role as a intelligence analyst reporter, which essentially is just taking all this different data that's flying in from all these different ships and all these different assets day after day after day, and turning it into readable reports in English for admirals, captains on ships that needed to know what was going on out in the Pacific Ocean so they could make the best decisions for them and their sailors. So that was my primary job in Hawaii.
Yeah. What was life sort of like when you were in Hawaii? Were you at a special base? Were you sort of just kind of living casually in Hawaii? What was the life like there for a while?
I was stationed on Pearl Harbor for the first couple of years, which I thought was fascinating because you grow up learning about Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor, and all that history. So being only a couple football fields away, going to bed every night from where all that happened was certainly eye-opening and exciting. And everyone that goes to Hawaii, essentially, until a certain rank, everyone stays on base. And just, they don't want young sailors moving off base and making teenage decisions when they first get there. So I lived on base for a couple of years, which I would say is very much like living in a dorm almost. You have your own room, but you share a bathroom normally with another room. So I always tell people I never got the college experience, but I kind of did while I was in Pearl Harbor. And then I would drive to, I was actually stationed, where I actually worked was in the middle of the island in Lahiwa, the NSA building. So I would commute there every day and then back to Pearl Harbor until I made E5, and that's the rank that, at least in Hawaii where I was, they let you move off base, and ended up renting a house with several other sailors that were there on the island.
Nice. So after Hawaii, what kind of motivated you or convinced you to go on to your next assignment?
So I volunteered to go to Afghanistan, which my wife always tells me it sounds crazy to volunteer. So after about a year on the island, when you're an intelligence analyst, it's very much a position where you can go work all across the globe, and you can even go work for other military units or branches of the military. And for me, I was in school when 9/11 happened. I remember coming home from middle school, it was on TV. I remember talking to my parents about it, but not truly understanding, what was going on maybe at that point. And then as you get older, you can understand what's going on in that war on terror. So when I got in and learned that was an opportunity for me to go be a part of that, and to me, what I felt like do my part, and kind of be a part of history at the same time, is I was always looking for an opportunity to go there. So I volunteered for a position on a cryptologic support team for Army Rangers out of Alaska. And once I was approved, I went to Fort Jackson for Army training. So that's where I picked up my second set of uniforms. So I had Navy uniforms, then picked up all my Army uniforms there. And essentially at Fort Jackson, any sailors that are getting ready to deploy to an active war zone, they're essentially just telling you how to live in the Army, how to use all the different weapons that they have to qualify on, all the different, new ranks, new everything. So it's a whole different, we're all in the Department of Defense, but each sector is kind of like its own business in a way, and we all run differently. So I learned how to be essentially an Army soldier for a couple months there. After leaving Fort Jackson, I went to Washington, D.C. for training before I went to Afghanistan, essentially learning how to do my job supporting Army Rangers in Afghanistan. And that's actually right before I left, I had my first in-person date with my wife as well. So everyone always tells me I have commitment issues because we started dating right before I went on deployment, and then we actually ended up getting married right before I deployed with the Marines. So I would get committed, and then I'd bail for a while. After that, went to Afghanistan supporting Army Ranger units. And while we were there, I was stationed in Forward Operating Base Salerno, which is right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And unfortunately, the nickname for the base was Rocket City because it got attacked so often. So that was enlightening to hear about before we got there. But while I was there for about a year. We're helping Army units find targets that were high priority. So people we could bring in or capture that we thought were going to be a harm to U.S. personnel or Afghanistan civilians. We worked very closely with the Afghan military while we were there. But essentially, we were the eyes and ears for these units when they would go out. And we would tell them where to go, when to be, where to be. And then afterwards, our job was to, again, condense everything that happened, all this information, everything that happened on these missions, and put it into English for commanders that were making decisions on the ground, so they had everything they needed to make the decisions on, where to send troops, what to have them do, or just who we should be targeting and where. So it was a very, very tense few months out there, and when you're deployed, there's no weekend, there's no off days. It's your schedule's 12 on, 12 off, 7 days a week. So you're working for 12 hours, you're off for 12 hours, and you do that till you go home. So that was a kind of the general life pattern in Afghanistan and how I got there.
Yeah. So you were a part of the Navy branch, but you also helped out with the Army and the Marines.
Yeah.
So what is life a little different between those different branches? Are there different assignments? What is that kind of like?
Yeah, they all have their own traditions, and there's even down to little things like just whether you say hoo-ah or rah, or different little quips that the different branches have, and they all have their. I feel like the different branches attract different personalities too. So everyone's from different places, but I think there's some similarities that draw people to certain branches. So the Navy and Marines are very similar in a way that Marines might not admit it, but they're part of the Department of the Navy. So we're kind of cousins / brothers. So a lot of the rank structures are pretty similar, just different names. But yeah, they're all a little different. I said I have 3 different sets of uniforms. I have Navy uniforms, Army uniforms, and Marine uniforms, and we're all on the same team. But all the branches love to razz each other and try to get under each other's skin. But it's all fun, and we all have so much respect for each other. But yeah, the day to day not too different. It's just getting used to what to say and what not to say. Yeah. Essentially learning the different verbiage. All the different branches have their own abbreviations, their own acronyms, and that could be some of the hardest things. Is essentially learning this new language every time you switch branches.
And then when you went between from the Navy to the Army and then Marines, was there different assignments sort of? Was there like a kind of a different idea of the task that's at hand?
Yes, my deployment with the Army was very active. I mean, all the intelligence we compiled and put together for decision makers was actionable intelligence that they were using right there on the battlefield. And I think that was a big reason why I wanted to volunteer to go there, be a part of that mission, the Global War on Terror, Operation Enduring Freedom, but also just to see the direct impact of the work you're doing too. When you're in Hawaii and you're monitoring the fleet, it's a very important job, but you don't always see the direct effect of the job you're doing day to day. So that was a big change in the Army. Is information. I was a 20-some-year-old intelligence analyst, and I have troops on the ground using information that I collected and compiled to essentially run missions off of. So that was a big change, and it really gives you some respect for what they're doing, and you see them doing their job too. And it just really makes you take every 12 hours or more that you're on the clock very, very seriously. I mean, there's no breaks or rest, because people's lives are depending on the decisions you make. So that was a big eye opener for me, and one big difference from the Navy. And then the Marines was kind of on the opposite side. Now, instead of me being the one training to go to Afghanistan, the tables are turned, and I was now the late 20-some-year-old teaching these 19, 20-year-olds what to do before they go to Afghanistan. So when I was in 29 Palms, everyone hears about IEDs, how dangerous they are, and there's the type you drive over or walk on that are obviously dangerous, but as technology develops, the big thing in the Middle East became IEDs that would explode from, you see it in movies like Hurt Locker and Jack Ryan, so, essentially IEDs that are connected to its cell phone. The phone essentially calls the IED, and that RF frequency sets off the explosive. So my job in 29 Palms was to teach these 19, 20-year-old Marines how to use equipment that would essentially keep them alive in Afghanistan and Iraq, using those RF frequency jammers that they would wear as backpacks or attach their vehicles to block those signals so they could keep them and the Marines and their units safe. So, still makes you take the job just as seriously, but it was interesting going from that trainee to trainer role.
Yeah.
In 29 Palms, they call the trainers coyotes. So I was Coyote 26 Delta. That's what everyone called me for a year. But that was interesting. We're teaching Marines how to use this super important equipment, and they're going to take that knowledge forward into these active engagement zones and be using essentially the lessons we taught them while we were there. So it was a way that I could still keep contributing to what was going on in the Middle East and these important missions, but not necessarily having to be there myself.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Now, as longer you're in the career, your whole career, the military is just training you to eventually be the trainer. So it's interesting to have that role flipped before I got out.
So you talked a little bit about IEDs. So that is obviously a very dangerous job to be dealing with. So what were some other, you can include about the IEDs, but what were sort of the danger that you dealt with working in these branches? Yeah, so the Marine work was very, they have tons of coyotes and instructors there, and they make sure it's very safe. It's an active training because they want it to be as real as possible. Even down to the point where they hire, people that speak Farsi and Arabic to make it seem essentially like you're living in the Middle East for that year while you're out there in California. And 29 Palms sounds nice, but it's in the middle of the desert. So really the most dangerous thing for me out there was getting the heat stroke, but because I was a little bit back from the action, but those guys are training with live ammunition, live explosives, planes, trains, tanks, automobiles, you name it. So they were definitely more in that active environment. Me as a trainer, a little bit more on the sidelines, viewing. But in Afghanistan, I think a lot of people don't realize that if you're in some of these smaller bases like I was on the border in the mountains, you are right in that engagement zone. So the base has radars that pick up stuff like mortars, rockets coming at your base. So any moment of the day, there could be a alarm on the base, and you're supposed to run to a cement bunker essentially, just in case the explosive is coming in your general direction. So those are going off day and night, especially being on the Pakistan border. Al-Qaeda and other members of groups would run across the border, set off mortars, and then run back into Pakistan so no one could chase them down. So that was a constant threat, and first couple days you get to Afghanistan, you're constantly worried about it, but it almost becomes so ingrained in your daily life that by your last few days you hear that alarm going off and you almost get into a mindset where you're like, well, if it's my day, it's my day, because it just becomes part of your life, which is hard to say now, but very real. So what was it like being a trainer eventually, or the growth to becoming a trainer, from the training to the trainer?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I got to get a very close look at how another branch like the Marines worked. If you're out there training and you hear how some of the guys in the military talk to each other, you'd think they hate each other because they're swearing at each other during missions, stuff like that. But it's really just a love language for the Marines. So it's interesting to see that. But having that full circle moment was really rewarding for me. Just being, I think some people don't want to get that call to find out, hey, you're getting mobilized or deployed for 20 days after your wedding, but knowing that they specifically wanted me because of my background, felt rewarding, and being able to go there and know that every day when I would run my classes and run the training and write the reports for these units out there, I knew it was having a direct impact in their lives and potentially even saving lives down the road too. So very rewarding experience, and I think it translated very well into I always call it the real world when you get out of the military, learning how to work with different people. As you move up the ranks at your job at work. In the civilian world, it's the same thing. You start at an entry-level position, and eventually you're a manager, a CEO. So it was, in my mind, I was getting that manager or CEO training that I could take into the real world while I was still in the military.
Nice. So what was kind of like your favorite part of being either in, not maybe your favorite part, but the most exciting or the most like interesting part for yourself, either being in like the military or being in the Navy, Army, or Marines?
Yeah, the original reasons I got in, those all did end up being the rewards I took away. Being able to get out of the military, come back to Wisconsin, and have my tuition at Wisconsin Lutheran paid for. Loved the college, loved the fact that I had the opportunity to do that. The places I went to, I was extremely lucky. I wouldn't necessarily vacation to Afghanistan if I had to choose, but I was able to be stationed in Pensacola, San Diego, Hawaii, even just being at the Great Lakes for boot camp. It's still a beautiful area down there. I was in Washington, D.C., Maryland. So I got to go to a lot of places that even just in the U.S. I might never got to. I got to be a part of that mission in Afghanistan. So I did travel the world in a sense, like I wanted to. But at the end of the day, if you're asking what my favorite part is, I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now as I look at all the people that were in my wedding. When I got married to my wife, Heather, we're all from different branches of the military. People had to fly in from all over the country, at least on my side of the wedding. And these were the guys I met when I was stationed in Hawaii, when I was in 29 Palms. Some of those people were my best friends. People I met in even very early on at boot camp and in Pensacola and my job training. Those are still some of my best friends. They were my groomsmen at my wedding, and we'll probably, those military relationships, you don't need to see each other every day, and it's, I think it's kind of unique, is you might not see each other for a couple of years. Some of those guys at my wedding I didn't see for 3-4 years, and the minute they showed up at rehearsal, it was like we saw each other every day. You just pick right back up where you left off. So at the time I thought it was the travel. Now looking back, being a little older, maybe a little more mature too, I realized it was those relationships coming out of it. And that was, the funny thing is, a big reason of me getting in too was one of my mentors growing up joined the Navy, David Warson, who did become a SEAL. I never doubted that he would make it, but he was a year older. I was coming out of high school. I had a couple of close friends, but always kind of felt like I didn't fit anywhere. And I think that's why the Navy drew me too, was that camaraderie and that family they build. But he was a big part of it. He helped me grow up a little bit before I went to boot camp, helped me with SEAL training that you do before you go. And we had a really close relationship going in. And it's nice that, now on the way out, I took away some relationships too, on this end.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about like family and also friends. So when you were kind of deployed a few times, was it difficult to like connect with your family or the people back home?
It probably depends on who you ask. Me, no. My mom, my dad, Heather, friends, they probably say yes. It's very unique. You don't think about it as much every day. I feel like when you're deployed, you miss your family, absolutely. But you almost don't have time to think too much about it because you're so busy and you're constantly working. The biggest thing is probably the time difference. When I was in Afghanistan, I was just starting my day and back, and here my wife was just ending her day. So that was probably the toughest part for us, and for me personally, was distance is hard. Distance plus essentially a half day of time change makes it that much harder. But having joined the military at 18, I think it wasn't as bad for me going in, because I was still young, and it just became a normal pattern in my life of being away from the people I love for an extended period of time.
And then what would you what would you give, or some advice you would give to someone who is in high school maybe right now, who wants to join the military, either like to decide which branch they want to go into, or just to join the military overall?
Visit every branch recruiting station. I don't know if my life would have been better or worse, or if I would have liked it more or less, but I felt like the Navy was a perfect fit for me at the end of the day. But like I said, at one point I thought I was for sure going to be in the Army, and then I was for sure going to be in the Marines, and then I ended up joining the Navy because after going to multiple meetings at all those different with the branches, I think you kind of fall into your fit. So I'd say, yeah, just visit every branch, learn as much as you can, but also too, think about what you want to do when you get out. I mean, I'm in finance now, so now instead of analyzing reports, I'm analyzing numbers all day. But it ended up being a really good fit for me in that way because I've always had an analytical mind. So I would say someone joining now, pick a branch or pick a job in one of those branches that corresponds to something you might want to do later, because it can be a huge jump start for the rest of your life if you do it the right way.
Yeah, and then also kind of like around the idea of advice. So what skills or like qualities do you think like the military or like specific branches look for like in young people who could possibly go into that branch?
So when you get in, everyone takes the ASVAB, which essentially is a test that shows the military, what are your strengths? Is it English, reading, math, science, hands-on? So I would say, sounds like what you hear from your parents every day, but definitely take school seriously. I was always an avid test taker, but not turn in my homework person. So my grades never reflected probably my intelligence level, but I felt like I was well prepared for that test because essentially that one test is going to open the door to all these different career fields. So even if you feel like college isn't for you and you're going to go in the military, still absolutely take school job training seriously because it's also going to affect what you end up doing in the military, because those tests that you take beforehand is essentially going to tell the Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force which jobs you seem qualified for. So if you come in and you're not prepared, it could limit what you do, at least originally, when you get into the military.
All right. So thank you so much for doing this interview today. Yeah. In closing this.
We have 4 more minutes. Ask some more.
Okay. So, what do you think, I'll say on like the topic of like the advice for people. So kind of like going into, like the specific branches, going into all of those, what do you think, made you choose specifically like the Navy, other than like going into the military right away, going into the Army right away?
Yeah, so I would say, again, it probably comes back to, I really wanted that family feel, kind of just start something new in my life. And luckily for me, when I decided to join the Navy, I found other people that wanted to do that before I got in. And, it helps get you motivated, trained up right for boot camp. But also, when I met David, who ended up being my mentor, he was a couple years older than me. He was joining the military out of high school. And I think, that's something just in the Navy in general. You're stationed with people that are all different ages. So it doesn't matter if you're 19, you could be working with someone that's 42, 50. It's very different than, kind of the day-to-day in the civilian world. But working with people with different backgrounds like that and finding those matches before you get in can just be so useful. I mean, I felt by the time we went to boot camp that, instead of being just acquaintances or just fellow sailors, it felt like David was like a big brother I never had. And I keep that with me all the time. Unfortunately, when I was in Afghanistan, after I came back, David was deployed with a SEAL unit in Afghanistan, and he actually lost his life during a mission in Afghanistan. So, that still affects me to this day, and but also motivates me to help more people the way he helped me. In my day-to-day life, trying to help people, but also doing things like this, or volunteering at veteran events, or events with for high schoolers that are getting ready to go to the military, to try to be that same mentor that he was to me for other people. Because I think if I wouldn't have had that, I would have still gone in the Navy, but I might not have come out of boot camp the same. I might not have had that positive attitude after I failed out of the SEAL program to go and really pursue being an intelligence analyst. So having those people in your corner, inside the Navy, you know, on top of the people you have outside of the Navy, like your parents and your friends, wives, etc., can really make that life in the military more rewarding, but also just easier to get through and you know, motivating to keep advancing.
Yeah. So the military definitely like kind of like shapes you as a person, but what was the main like topic or main thing you learned from like this overall experience? I know it's a big one.
Yeah, I learned a lot, but I think you know, not to, you know, sound too cliche or anything, but when I look back, the most rewarding parts of my military career were the days where I felt like at the time I was maybe miserable. I mean, you get to a point where you're deployed, like you're working 12 on, 12 off for, you know, a year, 6 months, whatever it is, that it feels like you're just kind of beaten down mentally and physically. But when you look back later, that time seems to go so fast. So I think it really molds you to take every day seriously and know that, you know, some of the bad days or the slow days down you might look back on, and those could be some of your most rewarding days in the future.
All right. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, in closing, this has been an interview of Colin Dewey regarding his service in Afghanistan and Hawaii. My name is Grace Roncke, and the time is 3:17. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you, I appreciate it.